you are really not in a position to take control of your health and to really move into your life and do things that you're here to do. And that's what I have a big problem with, that you're suffering unnecessarily and that your gifts are not being amplified because you're being, oppressed by health issues that you need not have if you were to simply have access to the correct information about your biology.
Welcome to the Betty Rocker Show, the place to be to nourish your mind, love your body, and rock your life. Welcome back, rock stars. So excited about today's conversation with the amazing and very popular, very requested Alisa Vitti, women's hormone and functional nutrition expert and pioneer in female biohacking. She created the cycle syncing method, a female-centric diet and lifestyle approach that leverages hormonal patterns for optimal health, fitness, and productivity, and has really brought to light the way we can feel our best, look our best, and do our best by leveraging our monthly cycle. She's the best-selling author of Woman Code, and her new book, In the Flow, is making big waves in women's health and helping to really shift the frame through which we see our bodies and optimize our lives. If you're not already using her amazing MyFlow app to track your cycle, you will want to by the end of this show. I just love learning from her, so join me in welcoming her to the show. Alisa Vitti, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Bree. It's awesome to be with you. Such a fan of your work.
Oh, thanks so much. And it's so mutual, mutual fangirling over here.
Oh, yeah. Lots of love. Lots of
and I remember, reading your book In the Flow was just completely shifted my perspective on so many things. You don't even realize the paradigms that you're living within sometimes until someone opens your eyes. And that book was such a huge deal to me. What inspired you to write that?
Thank you for saying that. I don't take that lightly that you feel that way, because you have read and been exposed to everything. And so I'm flattered, deeply flattered. What inspired me to write this book? Well, I've been helping women with their hormonal issues via Flow Living for the past 20 years. And 5 years ago, I got really excited and optimistic, more so than usual, because there was this phenomenon taking place on Instagram where young girls were posting pictures of themselves bleeding through their pants on their feeds. And I thought, this is new. This has never happened in the entire history of recorded human history. This is going to be what will happen. And what happened was we had what was referred to at that time, the mainstreaming menstrual movement, right? And Well and Good and Mind Body Green declared those as actual trends for 2 years in a row. I think it was 2017, 2018 or something to that effect. And I thought, finally, we're going to have all this conversation, all this media coverage. We're going to get the correct information, and women's health issues, hormonal health issues, will finally go down to reasonable statistical levels. And I've been watching and tracking. And in fact, it's not changed. It's only gotten worse. And now we're at a place, Bree, where 50% of women in their reproductive years are struggling with hormonal problems. And when you compare that to the male cohort, it's under 10%. So then I said to myself, why? Why is this happening? What is the fundamental root difference that would cause men to have an easier time with their hormones and women to suffer so much? What is really going on? And the answer to that question led me to write the book. The answer in a nutshell is simply that it's two parts. Women are being left out of medical fitness and nutrition research. And that's really important, because everything you've been told, from intermittent fasting to high intensity interval training as the exclusive gold standard to get you the results you want, is predicated on research that's done on men and sometimes postmenopausal women. And then that, coupled with the fact that we have a second biological rhythm that no one has ever heard about, called the infradian rhythm, that that we experience in the course of our 28-day cycle. But just like the circadian rhythm, we used to think only affected our sleep-wake cycle, and now we know it affects so many other systems of the body. The infradian rhythm affects 6 key systems of your body as a woman, from your brain to your metabolism to your immune system, your stress response system, your microbiome, and your reproductive system, which includes your period, your fertility, and your sex drive. No wonder if research on that rhythm is being excluded proactively, and everything that you're doing optimizes the male hormonal pattern, which follows that circadian rhythm. Everything you're doing to take care of yourself is disrupting that infradian rhythm and causing you to have suboptimal performance in all of those systems of your body. And this is why 50% of women are struggling with their hormones, frankly, unnecessarily, because the game is not rigged in support of their biological reality.
And when it comes to this paradigm that we've been living in, that all of us have been living in, where not only, to your point, research has been done on men, but we've been taught about our own bodies, or shamed. We have shame about our period. We are taught about our own bodies in a very clinical way that is not female-centric. And I personally would like to read a passage from your book where you offer us a different paradigm. And this passage changed the way that I see myself, and I want every woman listening to hear it. Is that okay? May I read this?
Oh, I'd love to.
All right.
Hear it.
I'm going to read it very emphatically because that's how I feel about it. It's amazing. Are you ready, listeners? Here we go. The female reproductive system is the crowning achievement of human evolution and reproduction. Efficient and highly adaptable, 7 hormones work in symphonic relationship to cause 4 highly refined processes to take place in a given monthly cycle. The development of multiple follicles, ovulation, the building of the lining of the uterus to prepare for possible conception, and the release of that lining when conception does not occur. When conception does occur, the process of gestation is absolutely breathtaking. The rate of growth of the fetus, made possible by changes in the woman's hormones, immune function, and metabolism, is astonishing. And the fact that this process is also beneficial to the mother is remarkable as well. The process of labor and delivery, one that seems to pose extreme physical danger, is the peak example of how women's bodies transform into a channel of power to safely deliver the baby and preserve themselves. The female body, biologically potent, supports this menstrual and reproductive process by being the more efficient extractor of micronutrients from food, by having the more developed immune system, by having a slightly slower metabolic system to retain nutrients for as long as possible before the elimination system gets to them, and by having more connections of nerve fibers between the 2 hemispheres of the brain. This biological precision ensures that a woman is sensitive to herself, her body, her community, and her environment, so she can make the best decisions for her well-being, as she is the one privileged by nature's design to carry the intense responsibility of creating the next generation of humans. And when not creating a human, all of these same systems support her in being a strong and attuned leader in her community and in the world. Wow.
I know. I get chills. I mean, that's what we should read in junior high school.
It's 100% what we should read. And you had a very different experience as a high school.
Yeah, I wrote that because what I read, my journey, to this love affair that I've had with menstruation started young. Started in 6th grade sex ed class, because the first time I ever heard about menstruation, I was awestruck. I was like, are you kidding me? This is what? Yeah, I was so excited about this thing because, I come from an immigrant family. And so there was just zero discussion about anything that was bodily related. So there was a lot of, in my culture, like this idea of you would just like preserve and protect children's innocence from hearing, anything stressful adult conversations or anything that's, I guess, related to sexual development as well. So when I heard about menstruation, it was literally for the first time. I wasn't allowed to read like teen magazines. So I didn't have any of the societal programs running as scripts in my mind the first time I encountered this information about what happens to us as young developing women. And I found it to be so extraordinary. And then I looked at my classmates, and they were all like, oh no, and it was very clear that they had been exposed to other messages. And then again, in junior high school, when I read in biology, the textbook, the description of what happens in the testes versus in the menstrual cycle, it was just such starkly disparate language, one being very positive and glorifying, if you will, in terms of the powerhouse of productivity that the testicles are, and that menstruation was really just this like useless throwaway disappointment when you didn't make a baby. And I thought that is ridiculous. It was so massively different the way they were languaging it that I thought somebody was doing it on purpose to make me feel not positive about my body. That was actually my reaction to it. I felt like I saw behind the curtain what was going on with Oz, and I'm like, is anybody else seeing this? Because this is not actually biologically accurate. And so, the problem is, and for whatever reason, I somehow managed to escape this conditioning just by total luck and coincidence. But so many of us are inundated with falsehoods and toxic mythology about who we are biologically, how our bodies work, and what this whole thing about your period is all about. You're told that, you're the weaker sex. You're told that you have a smaller brain. Well, that's true, but what the brain that you do have is way more powerful, right? And needs 20 minutes more of sleep every night because it's got so many more connections, synaptic connections. It has to take an extra 20 minutes every night to clean itself comparatively to men. And by the way, this is not I have a problem with men moment. This is, I just would like women to have the actual facts to stand on, as opposed to all this mythology that puts you in a negative relationship with yourself for no real reason. The mythology that your period is supposed to be painful, that your hormones are mysterious, unpredictable, unknowable, confusing entities that will plague you your entire life until the glorious days of menopause. Also not true, right? And so it's just, we have to look at the institutional gender bias, and that we've inherited that, and that we unfortunately have believed it to be chapter and verse without questioning it. And I hope that this book really clarifies, because I go in painstaking detail in the first section of the book to lay out for you, what every little region of your brain and why it's so uniquely powerful, comparatively speaking. Your metabolism is more efficient. Your immune system is stronger. You have a bigger insula region in your brain. You have a bigger prefrontal cortex, which means you're better at making decisions. You're better at processing your intuition. You have a bigger region of connectivity. It's called the corpus callosum. It's the bundle of nerves that sit between the two hemispheres of the brain. That's bigger in females, which means you are better just generally at processing right and left hemisphere information concurrently, meaning you can interpret facts and feelings and make a really good decision with your larger prefrontal cortex and with your bigger insula. And the way that you respond to stress is not fight or flight, it's tend and befriend, which means when things are difficult, you're going to seek a solution that is inclusive and that is sustainable for the vast majority of your community as much as is humanly possible. That's what your wiring is, just on a brain level. And, I mentioned the immune system and the metabolism. Then when we get to the reproductive system and your hormones, understanding this infradian rhythm that you've been deprived of just the terminology of, like, about your circadian rhythm. Everybody has a circadian rhythm. All this funding is going into researching the circadian rhythm. 2 years ago, 2 gentlemen, of course, won the Nobel Prize for figuring out the genes that code for the circadian rhythm. But no one's doing research on your infradian rhythm because it's quote unquote too complicated, which I also don't accept, because all of these very nuanced research aspects that they've been slicing up to look at, how does, someone's metabolic shift take place over the course of this section of the circadian part of the day. If they can figure out how to create controls for that, they can absolutely figure out how to create controls for your infradian cycle. But just really having you understand that it affects absolutely everything about your experience of reality is the missing piece, and that you have fundamentally, because you've been deprived of this information, because you're being left out of all of this research, because you're trying things that are optimizing the circadian rhythm, that are making you sick and symptomatic unnecessarily, you are really not in a position to take control of your health and to really move into your life and do things that you're here to do. And that's what I have a big problem with, that you're suffering unnecessarily and that your gifts are not being amplified because you're being, oppressed by health issues that you need not have if you were to simply have access to the correct information about your biology.
So helpful. All of this, so helpful. You go in such beautiful detail in your book in laying all of this out. I think a concept that really struck me when it comes to the infradian rhythm versus the circadian rhythm, because they are almost like, if you look at them as a male versus female system, they truly are, because you were describing like what happens for men's hormones over the course of a 24-hour cycle, over the course of a day. I believe you said that testosterone and cortisol are both higher in men first thing in the morning, and then they go through a natural cycle throughout the day. And I'd love for you to explain that and how our cycle is quite a bit different. And this world that we live in that is so geared towards the 24-hour clock and to the work week and to all these things really doesn't do us any favors. Would you talk about that a little more in detail?
Yeah. So while men sleep, they make all the testosterone they're going to have access to for the next day. And so it is very advantageous for them to get to bed at the same time every night, like 10 o'clock, and then to wake up as early as is possible for them, 5 or 6 a.m., when all of the testosterone and cortisol is being released into the bloodstream so they can take advantage of it to build lean muscle and to do deep work, which is why all of the fitness and nutrition advice and even success coaching will talk about this concept of the power morning and working out at certain times of the day, when men should be doing strength training versus cardio. It's very precisely timed. And you, of course, know all about that because of your work in fitness, that there are these times of day when one should do one type of exercise versus another.
No, we tell our women, you should be working out when it feels good for you and when it works in your day.
I'm saying for men.
Right, but for men, we look at this very differently.
And any coach that's training a male athlete will not make a suggestion that they do strength training later in the day, right? It's always front loading that when testosterone is present, because that's when you get the most muscle gain with the least amount of effort. So everything, men have been cycle syncing, which is a term I created, right? They've been syncing with their circadian hormonal patterns for millennia, right? In fact, the work environment, corporate culture, has all been synchronized to optimize and take advantage of these natural biological patterns for men. So if you think about like typical corporate day, you get to work early, the early bird gets the worm, right? You do some work, then you have meetings starting around lunchtime, and then around 4 o'clock, it's happy hour for networking. And then you go home, you have a quick dinner, maybe you do a little walk, and then you go into the man cave, you go to sleep, you make your testosterone, you start over the next day. And the mark of success for a male from his vantage point, which, Tony Robbins talks about this, Franklin Covey talks about this, is that you have the same routine each and every day, same. And that works if you have testicles really, really well, because your hormonal pattern and output is the same at the same interval every 24 hours. And so aligning yourself with the circadian rhythm and even thinking about biohacking the circadian pattern is absolutely something that is hugely advantageous for males.
Yes, and thank you for describing that for our male listeners and also for all the women listening who have men in their lives who they love, because we want to support everyone here, and that's why this is so important, because it isn't the same for women.
We are equally powerful and distinct.
That's right.
And we need to understand and be sensitive to these distinctions so that there's no unconscious bias that puts women at a disadvantage. I think that needs to just stop. And that has to stop in the way that we do our own self-care. It has to stop in the way that we report on health studies that come out, right? We should have disclosure that says, oh yes, this new study that came out about intermittent fasting is so good for you. Big caveat, this research was only done on men. So the little research we do have is saying that this may not be so great for women in their reproductive years. Take it with a grain of salt. It would take nothing to be including women's infradian sensitivity into reporting. It's just good disclosure and transparency. And we need to do it on the level of the biohacking community, which, has this unconscious gender bias toward just focusing on optimizing male circadian patterns, whether they're realizing it or not. And I think that they're not. We have to be more inclusive. And the way that we be more inclusive is to really speak specifically about biological rhythms, because that's what's distinct about us. Everyone has hormones. Men and women have estrogen and testosterone and cortisol and insulin and thyroid hormones. There's a lot about our hormones that are very similar. What makes them different is the timing of them and that biological rhythmic driving of the machinery of how they operate. And that's what we need to be attuned to. So we talked about men. And also, I love what you said about, being in better relationship. Like, I'm married to a guy who I love a lot. And, I factor in his hormonal biological pattern into our relationship, just as I ask him to factor mine in. And that can play out as simply as like when I might want to approach him sexually, right? I would not do that at 10 o'clock at night if I wanted to have an optimal experience with him, because that's when he has the least amount of testosterone and he's the most fatigued, and it's not going to be an optimal experience. Now, I may not be interested in doing it first at 5 o'clock in the morning when he is, but we can find a middle ground, right? And factor in both of our biological rhythms in a way that is mutually beneficial. And that's just, let's say, on the level of sex, but it goes way beyond that into activities you're going to do, when you're going to socialize with friends, when you're not, when you're going to spend time together as a couple, just nurturing each other, or when you're going to work on your domestic chores together. There's so many ways to use this knowledge to your advantage to make relationships more in the flow, so to speak, which, is something that I was inspired by Tony Robbins. I attended one of his events years ago, and he introduced me to this concept of this peak flow state idea, right? And I became fascinated by that. And I really tried to incorporate this practice of, this routine, this daily routine, and being in that peak flow state. And that's what would facilitate that. And I found very quickly that really collapses in the infradian rhythmic pattern, because we are not the same every day. So what is different about that for women? And how do we achieve a peak flow state? Because men have that on lock. If you are a man and you want to achieve a peak flow state every day, everything that you could possibly need has been researched. It has been taught. It has been written about. You can organize your schedule in such a way to optimize your health, productivity, and life. Get to it, because there's no confusion there. For women, we got to get a little bit caught up on this infradian pattern. So your infradian rhythm is something you experience over the course of the month. But like I said, it's much more than just about when you have your period and when you ovulate. It's about how it affects your brain chemistry and your metabolism and everything else. And you have these 4 phases. You have the follicular phase, the ovulatory phase, the luteal phase, and the bleeding phase. And I always like to call it bleeding and not menstruation, because it's confusing. Like, oh, when somebody says to you, I'm on my menstrual cycle, that's confusing, because is that the whole month? Is that when you're bleeding? The menstruation could refer to the whole month. It could refer to the bleeding week. The cycle could refer to the whole month or the bleeding week. There is doubling up on the language there that is unnecessarily confusing. So what I say is, since men decided what to call our experience of reality, let's just improve upon it a bit. We have that right. So call your bleeding week, and then your cycle is the entirety of the month, right? Because you do have these 4 phases. So just to reduce confusion for yourself and when you're speaking to physicians or other practitioners.
So helpful. And it's also like, this is literally what's happening, right? And we shouldn't be ashamed of it. We shouldn't have to hide it. We shouldn't feel bad about it. And these are all things that I grew up being very conditioned towards. I remember it being called on the rag. There's all these like horrible terms for it, right? We're literally bleeding. And let's just refresh ourselves on the fact that the female reproductive system is the crowning achievement of human evolution and reproduction, back to using your words again. And I'm suddenly in a better frame of mind already about this whole process.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if Dr. Oz made his career out of like talking about and demonstrating and creating visuals for your bowel movements for poop, right? And that's how he got his start on Oprah. And like people were fascinated by really diving in and being real about that. And actually, I have a lot of gratitude for him because when I went, the only time I've been on his show was to go on and give a visual demonstration of simulated menstrual blood. I used fruit juice. He was the one who said, we have to do this segment. We have to do it, even though it had never been done ever in the history of television, ever, if you can believe that. But we should know that the different colors and textures of our bleed are a form of biofeedback. Just like if you look at your bowel movement and it's not that beautiful banana-shaped C curve, the right color, that something's off with your gut, right? That's biofeedback that we've normalized, and we're not ashamed of looking at that biofeedback and then making choices to improve our food or our supplement choices that day to help out our bowels and our microbiome. We have to feel exactly the same level of just, self-scientific curiosity. Like, this month my period is dark and clotty, and that means something. I know what it means and I know what to do, right? I want you to have that kind of fluency with your body, because if you don't biohack, meaning respond to the biofeedback from your infradian rhythm, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you have all of this suboptimal performance in these 6 different systems of your body in the short term. And then, of course, that's going to have a snowball effect and lead to situations where you have unnecessary inflammation and other potential diseases long term. And so everything is riding on you really starting to care for this rhythm. So you have these 4 phases. I'd love to dive into just how this might affect you metabolically, because I think we're all so frustrated. There was this, I'm sure you remember this commercial, Brie. It was at least 5 or 7 years ago, where there was this commercial on TV and online where it was like these little drawn cartoon figures. It was like Sally and Joe, they are overweight and they want to go on a diet. They go on the diet together. After 30 days, Joe transforms from this stick figure, like fluffy stick figure, to like a Grecian god. He's got like a 6-pack and the whole thing. And Sally is still fat and frustrated after doing exactly the same food and fitness routine as Joe. And then the commercial goes on to say, poor Sally, who knows why this is happening? She needs help. She needs this medication. It goes on to promote this medication that Sally uniquely needs because her metabolism is just so deficient compared to men, which was not overtly stated, but of course was completely implied in the fact that they were comparing the male and female process there, right, to a diet. The reason why, if issues of weight have been plaguing you, or achieving some new level of fitness has been out of your reach, and I'm somebody who's been obese and has maintained a 60-pound weight loss for 20 years, so I'm speaking from direct experience, the reason why this is not happening for you is because you are doing the same calorie intake and the same workout intensity every day. The premise of your fitness plan, if it is calories don't change and workout intensity doesn't change, at the end of your cycle, 1 infradian turn of the clock, at best, you will have no change in lean muscle gain and fat loss. At worst, you will lose lean muscle and gain fat. That is universally a fact that you need to know. This is so important. The U.S. women's soccer team is now training their female athletes, including their infradian rhythm. It is not just this nice idea like, it'd be so great if I could like synchronize to what's going on with my hormones. This is, you have to do this, because if you don't do it, you're hurting yourself and you're creating problems where there need be none.
Yeah. So break it down for us in the 4 cycles around our metabolism, because I think we're all just like dying to know what the heck.
Yes. Let me give it to you. I'm not going to hold back. Okay. So in the first half of your cycle, your metabolism is slightly lower, which means you must and should have fewer calories. And then I'll layer in what's going on hormonally and the types of foods you want to focus on to help with your hormonal metabolism. But you can eat slightly fewer calories, and you have lower resting levels of cortisol. So you can and should do lots of cardio and lots of high intensity interval training till you can't stand it anymore. This combination of slower metabolism, lower resting cortisol, fewer calories, and higher intensity workouts will result in you maximizing your lean muscle gain and maximizing using stored fat as fuel. Whether you're trying to lose weight or not, that's not my focus. That's a side effect of balancing your hormones and taking care of your infradian rhythm, as I've seen with my own self. But you want to be using stored fat as fuel when you're working out, ideally.
And which is this cycle? This is after you've bled?
The follicular phase starts right after the last day that you have stopped bleeding. Then you right into your,
and you call that phase one, right? Phase one.
That's phase one, because so for those of you who are like, wait, but day one is the first day of your bleed. Sure, that works for fertility charting. That works because that's what has been the convention in medicine, which again was decided by men to make it easier for them to interact with your cycle as a practicing gynecologist or obstetrician, back in the 1800s. This was the only observable thing. I mean, legitimately, this was the only observable thing they could look at. So that was day one. However, anyone who menstruates knows that is not the beginning of the cycle. That is the culmination of the entire hormonal process. That is the end. And so the beginning of the next phase, the new start, is that follicular phase. And that's how we feel. The bleed is done, and now we start again.
Yeah, and
right?
sorry,
and so
I didn't mean to sidetrack you, because I want you to continue. I just wanted to clarify that very important point and help people orient to the different phases, because I found that to be very interesting in how you set that up, and also very intuitive.
Well, it should feel like what your experience is. And, just because men wrote about our bodies long time ago, and that hasn't been necessarily updated to include our vote on how we feel about it, doesn't mean that we can't just decide for ourselves how we want to reference these things. So you can still track day one as the first day of your bleed, especially if you're trying to conceive or do anything around fertility. But phase one, right, the fresh start of the cycle as a whole, is the follicular phase. So follicular and ovulatory, slower metabolism, and all the things that we said. Once you pass over ovulation, this is like remarkable. It's been documented, studied. These are some of the few things that have been studied. Now we have metabolism speeds up. You need precisely 279 more calories per day.
Wow. So when it comes to your luteal phase, what's the optimal way to be using your training?
So I think it's about really being, mindful of the fact that what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck is going to be doing things that are like strength training, using your own body weight, especially like if you're doing Pilates or things of that nature. Using some weights to train is always great. And if you're going to do, if you want to do a little bit of a HIIT workout, just making sure that that's on the shorter side, 15 minutes or something can be really helpful. But you want to play with, you may want to do that in the earlier parts of the luteal phase where you kind of are still kind of post-ovulatory for a few days, and you find that still doing a little bit of that HIIT workout is supportive to you for a few minutes. But then as you move closer to the bleed, really move yourself more over to that Pilates or heavy, slow strength training, and start to transition as your body is transitioning metabolically.
Okay, this is one of my favorite things. You're like, what if you went to a class and the instructor was like, ladies, those of you who are at the second half of your cycle, go ahead and work out in the back. And if you want to leave at the 30-minute mark, go right ahead, because you shouldn't be training for longer than that during this part of your cycle.
Yeah. And that's because your resting cortisol levels are higher. So if you work out beyond that 30 minutes, you're going to start to really create more of a cortisol response in the body, which is going to trigger that fat storage, right? And anybody knows, you have already lived this experience where ovulatory week, again, without you maybe calling it that, you go to a boot camp class, you crush it, you do the whole hour, you walk out of there, you're floating, you're flying, you're like, I love these people, I love my teacher, I love this class. The week later, you come back. Now you're in your luteal phase, although you didn't, you're not registering that. And you walk out of that class destroyed. Same class has destroyed you. And you then have a hypoglycemic reaction that you have to recover from for a day, right? And this is because you are also now not necessarily knowing to eat more calories, and your blood sugar does drop, and you have this cortisol issue. It's a mess, right? And so Yes, limiting workouts to 30 minutes is great, but it's the kind of training that you do that really will give you huge gains in lean muscle acquisition in the luteal phase if you don't do in high intensity type workouts. If you were to just hold a plank till you passed out, or squat it up against a wall till you couldn't feel your butt anymore, or, just lifted really heavy weights super slowly, all of that, or did Pilates, all of that. And again, stick to about 30 minutes. If you feel good and you've properly, fed yourself throughout the day, you might be able to get away with a little bit longer, especially if you're already really fit. For women who are hormonally imbalanced, what do I mean? If you suffer from garden variety PMS, definitely stick to 30 minutes in the luteal phase until you heal your PMS, and then you can go longer. But it's really changing the nature of how you're working out that's going to achieve maximum results. And I get that this is triggering. I do, because especially somebody who's been obese, the fear is if you don't do the same intensity workouts all the time, you're going to gain weight. If you don't,
people are worried about losing their muscular gains. They're worried. But what's amazing is we are not on the same cycle as a man. And so this is the whole point, is that if we're actually thinking about, and intuitively, ladies, we know, that we feel hungrier at different times of the month, right? And that's, you're going to talk a little bit about the layering piece of the hormones here, I hope, and how they impact our hunger and fullness. But that is on a 28-day cycle as well. And that's not something that you should be ashamed of. You shouldn't feel like there's something wrong with you for being a little bit hungrier at different times of the month. And I notice I have less of an appetite at the first phase of my cycle, which I can now talk about.
That's right. Yeah. So for example, if you are planning out your calories, if that's something that you do, right? And let's say you're sticking to a 1,400 a day calorie thing. That's your thing for right now. You want to do that in the follicular and ovulatory phases. And then as soon as you're done ovulating, you want to add 279 more calories per day to that. So it would be, what would that be? 14.
I don't know, because we don't teach calorie counting. I don't teach any calorie counting. I'm all about the but it's good to have the visual, right? Of just understanding.
Exactly.
That. Yeah.
So just so that you feel comfortable that is what is biochemically required. And if you don't give it to yourself proactively, right? If you don't give yourself the right types of calorie inputs in the luteal phase that are blood sugar stabilizing, slow sustaining foods, good fats, good digestible fiber sources, good proteins. If you don't do that, you will find yourself at some point in the evening waking up out of a trance where you've gone through a sleeve of some cracker or cookie or a bag of popcorn, and you're like, "Ooh, I'm at the bottom of this bag. How did that happen?" And that happens because when you don't support your blood sugar at this phase, your neurotransmitter called ghrelin will take over because you need these calories, and it will make you have this binge effect. You're eating things that are empty calories, but at least there's some calories, right? And your body needs something. So you might as well know that it's coming like clockwork every month.
Plan accordingly.
Yeah, and just plan and eat accordingly, because then you're going to feel fantastic. You're going to have energy. You're not going to have PMS. You're going to feel great. As you're supposed to, as you are designed to feel every single day of the cycle. There should never be a phase of the cycle where you feel like a different person, where you feel like you've fallen off the energy cliff, where you have excruciating symptoms. If any of those things are happening, that's simply biofeedback from your reproductive system to let you know that you're disrupting your infradian rhythm somehow, or you're putting in too many endocrine disruptors and things cannot work the way they're designed. And your body is lovingly offering you some feedback so that you can interact and make some course corrections.
It's a two-way communication. And you had this lovely little checklist of 3 things that you said, we're talking about syncing our cycle to our eating and nutrition habits. And then when you're trying to get into this, you said if you have hormonal issues, you should first stabilize your blood sugar, like you're talking about with whole foods, optimal foods. You talked about nurturing your adrenals. And I know we're going to talk in a minute about stress and lifestyle and how much that impacts us. So does overtraining. So does eating poorly. And then you also said support the organs of elimination. It sounds like as women, we need to be aware, much more aware of these body systems and how they relate to each other. And how they then support or don't support our infradian rhythm.
I mean, I think the big story here is that it is so much easier than you've been taught to think about how your body works. And if you just, instead of going at getting results with like a battering ram, go at it with a chart and strategy, like come at it with like a chess mentality versus,
it's not linear. It's non-linear. This is the thing. It's circular.
It's a cycle. It's a cycle. And so you just want to map it out and do the things at the right time. People, whenever people ask me on interviews, like, okay, what do you do in a day? What's your day like? When you do your perfect day or whatever.
Which phase of my cycle am I in? And then I'll tell you.
Because that's how I answer. I'm
like, your book has amazing charts, and it actually tells you the optimal
what to do,
optimal times of your cycle to eat specific foods, to do specific types of workouts. And before I lose that thread, what workouts are optimal for our bleeding phase, for the final phase?
Walking is good. Yoga is good. Any sort of like deep restorative stretching is good. And again, keep in mind your bleeding phase is on average 4 to 5 days.
Mine's 3.
Right?
Mine's really short. It's always been that way. So everybody's different.
Okay. If it's normal for you, but on average, we're saying it's, typically it's somewhere between 4 and 7. So let's just say it's 5 days. If you did, any trainer will tell you that cross-training your fitness plan is excellent for you because it prevents injuries and et cetera, and helps you with recovery. So if you could just think about the fact that for 4 or 5 days, when it is metabolically appropriate for you, you focus on recovery, stretching out your fascia, doing restorative yoga, doing walking that's just restorative, and then you get right back to it for the rest of the whole month. I mean, you're not going, again, I understand the internal dialogue of fear about losing ground, but what you're going to find if you do this for 2 cycles is how much ground you gain with less effort and so much bigger gains. And that's what I want for you, is to get more of what you want with more ease and less stress. Because the way that you've been doing it by using the wrong system that's geared towards the circadian cycle is creating enormous stress load in your body and giving you no results.
And this is the attitude that a lot of, I'm constantly, and my coaches and I, we just had a meeting about this yesterday. We find that we're constantly confronted with the more is more pushback from our members, from the people who use our programs. I'm like, I have to barter with people and negotiate with them just to take the rest days I have built into their programs, just to take the lower impact days, just to get them to do one challenge at a time or one program at a time, because women are so conditioned. You women listening, you're amazing. You're just freaking rock stars because you're such hard workers. You're so strong. Like, you have so much capacity, but this is why we burn out, when we abuse that capacity, when we put ourselves into this paradigm. And this is why this is such important information for me and for everybody listening, is because we need this. We need to understand how this works so that we can start to work with our system, work with our cycle, and stop doing this more. It's not more is more. It's working smarter, not harder. That's exactly what you're teaching us. So
it's not. And I would say, let's stop asking the question of what is the perfect diet or what is the perfect exercise routine. Let's ask when. Stop asking what, start asking when. When should I do certain things? When does it make sense for my metabolism, my stress response system, my immune system? When is this optimal? And we haven't even touched upon the 3rd pillar of the cycle syncing method, which is this method that I created to support the infradian rhythm. The first pillar, of course, is the food piece. The second is the fitness. But the third is the fact that Dr. Catherine Woolley in 1996 discovered at Northwestern that your brain changes by 25% over the course of the month. This is an incredible advantage. You have no idea about what you don't, we don't know what we don't know because no one's telling us about it. And so the 3rd pillar of the cycle syncing method is where you actually start to manage what you're working on based on these 4 phases so that you can get more done with less stress, be your most productive and creative self without burning out constantly, and working toward your dreams in a very sustainable way. I mean, how I do all that I do is 100% due to the fact that I take advantage of what's going on in my infradian rhythm. Full stop.
Oh, it's brilliant. And talk to us a little bit more about about how stress impacts those 6 systems. We had talked about that before.
Well, I mean, I guess what I can say is that when you, for example, like with the Boston Women's Nurses study, right? They were looking at what happens when you disrupt the circadian rhythm, like extremely. So meaning you flip-flop the day, you work at night and you're asleep during the day. Well, actually they found out a tremendous amount goes wrong when you do that, when you disrupt it that profoundly. But even little disruptions, right? And we all now know all these wonderful sleep studies come out. Any loss in sleep has massive inflammatory effects on the body, on the brain, on your metabolism. It is not good to disrupt this key biological rhythm in your body. Similarly, when you disrupt the infradian rhythm, right? When you choose to continue to restrict calories post-ovulation, right? Now we're creating an inflammatory response because now blood sugar is going to go off, cortisol levels are going to go up. Who knows what you're eating? If you're living on caffeine to get through the hunger, all of these things are going to create responses that are going to lead to increased stress. And that can be metabolic stress, that can be inflammation-based stress, that can be actual cortisol hormone production. There are many ways in which you can create a stress response in the body. This can then start to impact your thyroid function, which is then going to create a whole other stress cascade. So that's just not getting the calorie input right. And we're all guilty of doing that because we've been told, oh, we're just smaller versions of men. We have to restrict calories more. Completely not based in actual scientific fact, actually. By the way. So then if you add in every single thing that you do that is out of alignment with your infradian rhythm beyond just your calorie input. But for example, let's say you're not using plant-based foods during ovulation to help offload all that excess estrogen that is supposed to be circulating at that time to support the liver and breaking that down and getting it out of the bowel. That's going to create some stress and inflammation in the body. If you do the wrong workouts at the wrong time, that's going to definitely jack up your cortisol levels. If you don't work according to these brain chemistry changes, you're going to feel stressed out. You're going to feel like you're running out of time all the time. And we know what happens with women when they feel that way in their work environments. They usually just leave because they don't understand that it could get any better, because they're just simply trying to squeeze themselves into that 24-hour pattern as best as they can for as long as they can until they just kind of have this health collapse of some sort where they feel like, okay, well, this job or this environment is just not working for me. Maybe I need to start my own thing. Maybe I just need to stop. But it's just, we could have a better experience. And I go into corporate environments as often as I am invited, and I knock on doors even to just go and actually train mixed gender teams and teach them about how do we make the workplace more inclusive of both the circadian and infradian rhythms so that everyone's biological reality is included here so that they can all have optimum productivity. Because Harvard Business School has studied left and right that none of us can make more time in the day, but we can modulate our energy and productivity relative to our energy. So men are set up to succeed at that game of managing their energy and then increasing their productivity. Women, without the information about the infradian rhythm, are not set up to succeed and find a lot of dissatisfaction in the work environment as a result, again, which is unnecessary. So all of this unnecessary stress over time can have major effects on your brain function. Dr. Lisa Mosconi, who I am a huge, just in awe of the work she is doing at her Brain Institute in New York, really looking at the cumulative effects of hormonal imbalances as it increases risk for dementia. 15 years ago, the National Institute of Health put out a really important study called the Biocycle study that shows that if you just have garden variety PMS that goes untreated in your reproductive years, it leads to an increased risk of the 4 big diseases of inflammation postmenopausally: diabetes, heart disease, cancer, dementia. This is why taking care of your infradian rhythm is a must do, not a nice idea. And again, let's just take our cues from best practices that we're seeing men do who are synchronizing with their hormonal cycles to great health and life advantage. We should do the same for our own biological rhythm, which is just slightly different than theirs.
How do you cycle sync with your productivity as a woman using this infradian rhythm?
So for example, I'll pull out a couple of, I'll try to go through all of them. I always like to start with ovulation because it's one that we're most familiar with, but this is when we have that super surge of estrogen to trigger ovulation. But what it's also doing in your brain is super stimulating your verbal and social centers, right? Which means you know this is going to happen every month, every time you are due for your ovulation. So for that whole week, even though ovulation only takes place for a few hours, we are pre-ovulatory and slightly post-ovulatory. We have a halo effect. So let's just give it a week, right? Or 5 or 6 days. You can front load your schedule in advance. You can stack your schedule with things that are going to take advantage of your verbal and social skills. Giving presentations, going on first dates, negotiating a raise, presenting at a conference, anything that you feel uses those skills, going to a networking event. Stack those events at that time. That work product, do it then. Then we have the luteal phase, which is probably the most vilified, maligned phase of the cycle because it's the one that we all think is PMS week. Well, it's only PMS if you have an imbalanced ratio of estrogen and progesterone and your hormones are out of balance. You should have slightly more progesterone than estrogen during the luteal phase. And what does progesterone do? It's the longest phase of the cycle, 10 to 14 days. Nature has given this massive gift to you because progesterone in your brain has this very calming and focusing effect. So you can for real, roll up your sleeves, close your proverbial door, say no to social events and get stuff done and totally crush your deep work and your to-do list. You are going to be turned on by it. It'll be woo, I'm so into this work that I'm doing, because it is lining up with what's happening in your brain chemistry, right? Of course, by the way, studies have shown you as a female, even with these brain changes, because men have them too, in a 24-hour period, can do anything at any time. But just like it wouldn't be optimal for you to wake up in the middle of the night and go for a 5-mile run, or try to read a book at 2 a.m, or pay your taxes at 3 a.m, right? It's not optimal. You can, but doing that creates a lot of stress over time if you're doing that every day. Same thing. You can do anything you want, any phase of your cycle. But if you don't take advantage of what's going on and try to align with it, over time, it's going to create more and more of a stress response and burn you out faster. Another phase of the cycle that I think we have no appreciation for is the bleeding phase. This is the time of the cycle where the two hemispheres of your brain connect most across that corpus callosum, which means this is the time of the month where I do all my evaluation. Whether that be looking at reports from my team, whether that be evaluating my finances, whether that be evaluating just my life. How are these different categories of my life working? Did I achieve what I set out to do this month? If yes, awesome. If no, why not? What got in the way? Where did I forget to support myself? Where did I lapse on setting some boundaries that were needed? How can I learn from what took place so that I can do better next month? I do not believe in the New Year's resolution, because every bleed is your fresh start. Evaluate, figure out where you want to point yourself. And then when you get to the follicular phase, because of what's happening in your brain with lower levels of estrogen and all the other hormones, this is when you're percolating with new ideas and you want to brainstorm and put down your project plan of what you want to do for the next month based on the evaluation you
So the follicular phase
your bleeding
is phase 1, right? Back to phase 1 again.
Right. That's the planning phase.
And estrogen is higher or lower in the... It's
lower.
lower.
It's lower, but it's rising.
Right. It's going up.
Rise. Yeah.
Super, super interesting. And so in the follicular phase, what are we doing there?
You're curious, you're creative, you want to make plans.
You initiate things.
You're you initiate, you want to get going, right? So make your plans, put out your project map, look at the whole month, look at the things that you have been invited to, stack them in appropriate places.
Here's the mistake I make.
To things.
I'll say yes to something during my follicular phase, but then the event actually falls during my phase where I don't want to see anybody. I just want to be at home. And that's when I have to be maybe more mindful.
You have to make, that's what I'm saying. That's why you use the MyFlow tracker, because the MyFlow tracker will tell you if you're going to go schedule something in that phase, it'll say,
that's right. I love this.
Are you sure you want to do that?
Now, if this is sounding a little bit overwhelming because you're like, wait, there's all these phases. I got to tell you guys, I downloaded Alisa's app. It's fantastic. And it gives you this fantastic overview of each of the different phases of your cycle. The MyFlow app, it's awesome. And I'm just opening it up right now because I just want to look. It shows me where I'm at actually in my cycle right now. And I can pop open any of these and I can go through what my hormones are doing in that cycle, how I can best use my focus at this part of my cycle, how to best exercise during this part of my cycle, some of the optimal foods to eat, and also great stuff about your sex life and how to optimize it during this part of your cycle, whether you're single or in a couple.
Which, by the way, I put in there not because that's just fun information, but as you read in the book, 60% of women are not sexually satisfied. Again, that is not the same galaxy when we look at the male percentage of sexual dissatisfaction. And why I care about that is not just because of the gender disparity, but because what happens biochemically in your body when you are in your orgasmic plateau, which is right before climax, right? The phase before climax, is extremely health beneficial for you and helps regulate your hormones and gives you all the benefits of intermittent fasting, so to speak, in terms of anti-aging and brain protection and heart protection without actually having to do the intermittent fasting, which you should not be doing in your reproductive years beyond the 12-hour fast from dinner to breakfast. If you do anything longer, you will have all the opposite benefits. It will disrupt your insulin sensitivity, your thyroid, it can shrink your ovaries, it can make your brain less optimal. I mean, all the things, I wrote about it in the book, so you can look at the studies. You do not want to do that. Once you are postmenopausal, once you've had 12 months with no bleed and you're on the other side, you should be intermittent fasting the way that it was researched and described in that more maximal way. That's certainly what I'll be doing when I get to that stage. But for now, while my infradian rhythm is still active, the only way to take care of myself properly is to use the cycle syncing method so that I'm really taking care of the shifts that are taking place metabolically, with stress response, and with my brain changes, so that I am really reducing stress, but also optimizing my results.
And guys, you may recall when Dr. Brighton was a guest on the show, she talked a little bit about seed cycling and so you've heard a little bit already about some cycling with nutrition, but this takes it to the next level. I mean, this is adding diet, nutrition, stress management, productivity, putting it all together so that you can really just optimize your entire life experience as a woman through different phases of your life.
That's what I'm here to stand up for. I am here as a stand, so to speak, for women to have the opportunity to finally feel good in their bodies. I am invested in women actually having the opportunity to have their whole health be a springboard into which they can leap and create a life that is amazing, because you deserve it.
You do deserve it. And this is every woman guest we've had on the show has offered us a different piece of this in their own way. And this has just been such a incredibly valuable piece. And I know that a lot of my listeners are going to be eager to follow up by reading your book, which is just one of your books, one of your wonderful books, In the Flow, which is what we were talking about today. I mentioned Alisa's app, which is fantastic. MyFlow is what it's called. No W on the end. And then I believe you also have a gift for our listeners. It's that's
Absolutely.
amazing.
If you're like super psyched about the infradian rhythm and you're like, I see the light, I want to support you in every possible way. So I'm inviting you all to join for a free month for what the cycle syncing membership, which we also call Flow 28, because it's 28 days of your cycle. And I want you to be in the flow. And this is a membership that's going to give you access to recipes and foods that you should be eating for each of the phases, some workout videos for each of the phases. It's going to help you with your time management and productivity. And you get a monthly master chat with me in our private Facebook community, where we roll up our sleeves and we figure out how do we live in an infradian life in this circadian world. And we're doing that with thousands and thousands of women from all over the world. And it's a pretty special place to be and a conversation to have. So I'm so happy to invite all of you for free to join us and
we will
that.
be posting a link to that in our show notes page, and you'll be able to use code Betty Rocker when you sign up for that, and you'll get to access a free month so that you can really try this out and see if this is everything that we're saying it is, risk-free. That's what we want to make sure, that you get an opportunity to really take this for a test drive. And also, it's very easy to find Alisa's book and books and that wonderful app if you want to just put your toe in the water and start to see more about this amazing topic that I just feel like I want to just tell every woman I know about their infradian rhythm. And thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and be such an amazing guest. I barely had to say anything because you are amazing and just so informative. I mean, thank you so much.
So my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Really enjoyed having you. And I just want to give you the last word. Just, is there anything we didn't talk about or mention that you would like to just mention now or go over one more time?
Just know that it feels like it can take years to unlearn what you've been taught about your body, as I quoted some wonderful woman in the book. But I hope that you've been inspired today to reclaim who you are and come home to yourself, because it's a great place to live.
It certainly is. What an uplifting message. And thank you so much for listening to today's show. I know it went by fast and there was a lot of information to take in. So be sure to check out Alisa's book, In the Flow, that's flow with no W, and get all the links that we mentioned, including her free guide, links to her site, books, and the resources on our show notes page over at thebettyrocker.com/podcast. This week, we talked about how to eat, train, and live with our cycle and the natural hormone fluctuations that occur. Coming up next week, we're going to talk about hormone imbalances and what you can do to get things back to normal with hormone optimization expert Dr. Gallery Rocco. If this is a topic you're excited to hear more about, check out her book before the show. It's called Growing Younger: Restore Your Hormones, Energy, and Sex Drive. I can't wait to welcome you back for that conversation. So until next time, take great care of yourself. Remember that you're a role model to the people in your life who look up to you. And as always, I'm Betty Rocker, and you are so awesome and amazing. I'll talk to you again real soon.
This podcast is for information purposes only. Statements and views expressed on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Brie Argetsinger, Betty Rocker Inc., and the producers disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. Before starting a new exercise, fitness, or health protocol, or if you think you have a medical problem, always consult a licensed physician.